You need to understand what feels like betrayal is often their inability to handle real connection, not your lack of worth. And that distinction is something your heart struggles to accept because pain always looks for a reason, and the easiest place to look is within yourself. You replay everything, every message, every moment, every conversation, searching for the point where you went wrong, the moment you said too much or didn't say enough, the moment you became too available or maybe too emotional, and slowly, without realizing it, you begin to turn their distance into your responsibility. But you need to understand, not everyone knows how to hold something real when it is placed in their hands. Not everyone has the emotional capacity to stay when things stop being easy and start becoming meaningful. And that is where the confusion begins. Because from your side, what you gave felt natural. It felt honest. It felt like the kind of connection people talk about when they say they want something genuine. You showed up. You listened. You cared. You were present in a way that required vulnerability, patience, and emotional openness. And for you, that is what love looks like, something you build, something you nurture, something you protect. But for someone who is avoidant, that same depth can feel overwhelming, not because it is wrong, but because it asks something from them they are not used to giving. And in the beginning, they might step into it. They might meet you in moments. They might show glimpses of closeness. They might allow themselves to feel something real with you. And those moments are powerful. They are the ones you remember, the ones you hold on to, the ones that convince you that what you have is worth fighting for. But you need to understand, those moments are not the full picture. They are just pieces, because when things start to require consistency, when emotions become steady instead of occasional, when the connection asks for presence instead of just chemistry, something inside them starts to pull back. Not because you did something wrong, but because they are not comfortable living in that level of emotional depth. They are used to controlling distance, used to stepping in and out, used to feeling without committing to what those feelings require. And when they pull away, when they create distance, when they become inconsistent, your heart experiences it as betrayal. Because from your perspective, something real was there, something meaningful was growing, and instead of protecting it, they stepped away from it. And that hurts in a way that is difficult to explain, because it is not just about losing them, it is about losing what you believed the connection could become. It is about feeling like something that mattered to you was not treated with the same importance by them. But you need to understand, their inability to stay is not a reflection of your value, it is a reflection of their limits. You did not give too much. You gave to someone who could not receive it fully. You were not too intense. You were present with someone who is uncomfortable with emotional consistency. You were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. And I know there is a part of you that still wants to make sense of it, still wants to believe that if you had done something differently, if you had been a little less, a little quieter, a little more distant, maybe they would have stayed. But that belief will only keep you stuck because it is built on the idea that you need to change yourself to be loved properly. And that is not the truth. The truth is, the right person does not require you to become less of who you are in order to stay. The right person does not feel overwhelmed by your consistency. They feel safe in it. The right person does not pull away when things become real, they lean in. So what you experienced was not a failure of your love, it was a mismatch in emotional capacity. You brought depth into a space where someone was only comfortable with surface. You brought consistency into a space where someone was used to inconsistency. And instead of meeting you, they retreated into what felt familiar to them. And that retreat felt like betrayal because your heart was open while theirs was pulling away. Your intentions were steady while theirs were uncertain. Your presence was constant while theirs became distant. But betrayal does not always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from incapacity. Sometimes it comes from someone wanting connection but not knowing how to sustain it. Sometimes it comes from someone stepping into something real and realizing they are not ready to carry it. And that does not make your experience less valid. It does not make your pain less real. It does not make what you felt any less meaningful. It simply explains why something that felt so real to you could not continue in the way you hoped. You need to understand you are not someone who was too much. You are someone who was willing to love in a way that requires depth, honesty, and emotional presence. And that is not something to shrink. That is something to protect. Because one day, that same depth, that same presence, that same willingness to show up will meet someone who is not afraid of it, someone who does not pull away from it, someone who does not see it as overwhelming, but as something valuable. And when that happens, you will realize something that is hard to see right now. You will realize that what felt like betrayal was actually redirection, that what felt like rejection was actually protection, that what felt like loss was actually the removal of something that could not hold you in the way you deserve. But for now, you need to be gentle with yourself. You need to stop turning their behavior into a reflection of your worth. You need to stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And start understanding that you were enough, just not for someone who lacks the capacity to hold what you bring. And that truth, even though it hurts, is also the beginning of your healing, because it allows you to stop blaming yourself for something that was never yours to fix. You need to understand, the real karma is not revenge. It is your growth, your silence, and your absence that they did not prepare for. And that kind of karma does not shout. It does not announce itself. It does not come with dramatic moments or loud endings. It arrives quietly in the way you change, in the way you stop reacting, in the way you begin to choose yourself in places where you once chose them. Because if you are honest with yourself, there was a time when you wanted them to feel what you felt. You wanted them to understand your pain, to experience the same confusion, the same emptiness, the same ache that came from loving someone who could not meet you fully. You wanted some kind of balance, some kind of justice, something that made it all make sense. But you need to understand that kind of thinking keeps you tied to them. It keeps your healing dependent on their realization, on their regret, on their ability to finally see what they lost. And the truth is, your peace cannot come from that place. Real karma is not about making them hurt. It is about you no longer hurting in the same way. It is about you reaching a point where their absence no longer controls your emotions, where their silence no longer pulls you into overthinking, where their inconsistency no longer makes you question your worth. It is about you stepping out of the cycle that once defined your connection. And that is something they did not expect. They expected you to react the way you always did. They expected you to reach out, to ask questions, to seek closure, to try one more time. They expected your heart to keep the door open, no matter how many times they stepped away from it, because that is what they were used to. That is what felt normal in the dynamic you shared. But when you stop doing that, when you become quiet in a way that is not waiting but deciding, something shifts that they cannot control anymore. Your silence becomes different. It is no longer filled with hope. It is no longer filled with longing. It is no longer a pause before you try again. It becomes a boundary. It becomes a statement that you are no longer available for the same pattern, and your absence becomes real. Not the kind of absence where you are still emotionally present, still thinking about them constantly, still hoping they will come back, but the kind of absence where your energy is no longer invested in them. The kind where you begin to rebuild your life without them at the center of it. And that is where the real karma begins. Not for them, but for you. Because you start to change in ways you did not expect. You start to feel lighter, not immediately, not all at once, but gradually. The constant tension begins to fade. The need to check your phone, to analyze their behavior, to make sense of their silence, it slowly starts to lose its hold on you. You begin to realize how much of your energy was being spent on something that was not giving you the same in return. You begin to see how much you were carrying, how much you were compensating, how much you were trying to keep something alive that required two people. And with that realization comes something powerful, detachment. Not coldness, not indifference, but a quiet understanding that you deserve something different, a quiet acceptance that what you had was not enough for you, no matter how much you cared about them. And that is something they were not prepared for. Because as long as you were emotionally attached, as long as you were still reaching, still reacting, still hoping, there was a connection they could return to whenever they felt like it. There was a version of you that would still be there, still open, still willing. But when you grow, when you truly step into your own life, that version of you disappears. And suddenly, if they look back, they do not find the same access. They do not find the same availability. They do not find the same person who once made it easy for them to come and go. And that is where they begin to feel something different. Not necessarily regret in the way you imagined, not always a clear realization, but a shift, a sense that something has changed, a sense that the connection they once relied on is no longer there in the same way. because your growth removes the space they once occupied so easily. And this is important for you to understand. Your growth is not meant to send a message to them. It is meant to bring you back to yourself. It is meant to reconnect you with your own life, your own needs, your own sense of worth that does not depend on whether someone chooses you or not. It is meant to remind you that your value was never in how much you could endure, how much you could give, how much you could stay despite the pain. Your value is in your ability to recognize when something is not aligned with you and have the strength to step away from it. And that is the real shift. Because you stop seeing their actions as something you need to fix, and you start seeing them as information. You stop trying to understand why they behaved the way they did, and you start understanding what that behavior means for you. You stop asking, how do I make this work? And you start asking, is this something I should stay in? And those questions lead you to a different place, a place where your decisions are no longer driven by attachment, but by clarity. And in that clarity, something beautiful happens. You become free. Free from the cycle, free from the confusion, free from the emotional weight that once kept you tied to something that was not giving you what you needed. And that freedom is something they did not expect, because it means you are no longer someone they can return to in the same way. You are no longer the person who will reopen the door without change, without effort, without consistency. You are no longer the person who will accept the same pattern and call it love. And that is the kind of karma that does not need to be seen to be real. It lives in your peace. It lives in your growth. It lives in the way you move forward without needing them to look back. You need to understand the ending they didn't expect is not you breaking, it is you becoming someone who no longer needs them. And that is a transformation that happens quietly, deeply, and in ways that even you may not fully recognize at first. Because there was a time when the idea of losing them felt like losing a part of yourself, when the thought of them walking away created a heaviness in your chest, a fear that you would not be okay without their presence in your life. You remember that version of you, the one who waited, the one who checked their phone, the one who read into every message, every delay, every shift in tone. You remember how much of your emotional world revolved around them, how their attention could lift your mood and their silence could break it. And in that space, needing them did not feel like weakness, it felt like love. But you need to understand, needing someone and loving someone are not the same thing. And sometimes what feels like love is actually attachment built on inconsistency, on uncertainty, on moments that come and go instead of something steady that stays. Because when someone is consistent, when someone is present, when someone meets you with clarity, your nervous system rests. You do not feel that constant pull, that constant anxiety, that constant need to figure out where you stand. You feel safe. You feel grounded. You feel secure in a way that does not require you to question everything. But that is not what you had. What you had was something that pulled you in and pushed you away, something that gave you just enough to stay, but not enough to feel secure. And over time, without realizing it, you became used to that pattern. You became used to the highs and lows, the presence and absence, the connection and the confusion. And that is where the need was created, not from love alone, but from the unpredictability of it. So when they stepped away, when the distance became real, it felt like something inside you was being taken away. It felt like you were losing something essential, something you had invested so much of your heart into. And that is why it hurt so deeply, not just because they left, but because you felt like you could not imagine yourself without them. But then something began to change. Not all at once, not in a dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, in ways that you may not have even noticed at first. You started to sit with the silence instead of running from it. You started to go through your days without reaching for your phone as often. You started to find small moments of peace that did not involve them. And those moments were subtle, almost invisible, but they were important because they were the beginning of you returning to yourself. You began to realize that your life still moved forward, that your world did not stop, that your identity was not defined by their presence. You began to reconnect with parts of yourself that had been quiet for a while, your thoughts, your interests, your sense of independence. And with that reconnection came something powerful, a shift in how you saw yourself. You started to see that you were not someone who needed to hold on to something that was not holding on to you. You started to understand that your worth was not tied to whether they chose you or not. You started to feel a sense of stability that did not depend on their attention. And that is the part they did not expect. They expected you to stay in the same place emotionally. They expected you to remain attached, to remain available, to remain someone who would still respond the same way if they came back. They expected the version of you that needed them. But that version of you is not the same anymore. Because once you begin to rebuild your sense of self, once you begin to find your footing again, once you begin to feel your own strength, something changes in the way you see them. You no longer see them as someone you cannot live without. You see them as someone who was part of your life, someone who mattered, someone who left an impact, but not someone who defines your future. And that shift is everything. Because now, if they were to come back, if they were to reach out, if they were to try to reconnect, you would not respond from the same place. You would not respond from need, from longing, from the fear of losing them again. You would respond from awareness, from clarity, from a place that asks, is this right for me now? And that is something they were not prepared for. They were not prepared for you to outgrow the version of yourself that needed them. They were not prepared for you to become someone who values your peace more than the connection that once disrupted it. They were not prepared for you to no longer be easily pulled back into the same dynamic. Because the power has shifted, not in a way that creates distance out of anger, not in a way that makes you cold or indifferent, but in a way that makes you grounded. In a way that allows you to choose what you accept and what you walk away from, and that is the ending they did not expect. They expected you to break, to chase, to hold on, to stay emotionally tied to them even after they created distance. But instead, you became someone who can let go without losing yourself, someone who can miss them without needing them, someone who can move forward without carrying the same emotional weight. And that does not mean the journey was easy. It does not mean there were no moments of doubt, no nights where you missed them, no times where your heart wanted to go back to what felt familiar. But you kept moving. You kept choosing yourself in small ways, in quiet decisions, in moments where you could have gone back but did not. And those choices built something inside you, something stronger than attachment, something more stable than hope alone. They built self-trust. And self-trust is what allows you to stand in your life without needing someone else to complete it. So you need to understand the ending is not about them losing you. It is about you finding yourself again. It is about you becoming someone who no longer needs to hold on to something that was never fully holding on to you. And in that, there is a kind of peace that no one can take from you because it does not come from them anymore. It comes from you.